Right. Good morning. My name is Julie Portillo. I am a domestic violence adult counselor at Freedom House. I've been working in my role for just over 2 years. When I first started at Freedom House, I was working both with children and adults, but I primarily work with adults now, though there is some overlap and we do family counseling. So I have a lot of clients whose kids see our children's counselors, and then I'll work with the parent. And there's oftentimes we'll all join together to do family counseling. Um, I am excited to be here with you all today. This is a different presentation than I've done in the past, and so I'm just excited to have some different material and a new audience today. So some things we're going to look at today. I know you guys worked with, why is that not advancing? Okay, here we go with the technology. There we go. Um, I know you guys have had a presentation with Amber, and she talked a lot about the different dynamics of domestic abuse. And then Mary spoke on Monday about how domestic violence impacts children. So today we're going to look a little bit at how abusive relationships end and what life is like beyond the abusive relationship, emphasizing the importance of safety first. We're going to spend some time on just talking about safety planning and support systems. Both of them are detrimental to a victim leaving after an abusive relationship. And then we're going to look at how Freedom House can step into that role, helping clients seek safety and support. And then the second half of the presentation, we're going to look at triggers and grounding techniques and the importance of self-care. I don't know everybody's story and history with domestic violence, but I imagine that you at least know somebody who has fallen victim to domestic violence. And so hopefully things that we're talking about today, you can apply either personally, or if you know people, like I said, who are victims of abuse. I think you are all parents. I'm a parent myself. I think there's things that when we talk about grounding techniques that are just as applicable to when parenting, because let's face it, parenting is extremely hard. Just a quick disclaimer, for the sake of this presentation, I may refer to an abuser as a male and a victim as a female, and that's just based on statistical data. We are very well aware that men are also victims of abuse and that women are abusers themselves. I also just want to say, if at any point you have any questions, unmute yourself. I will pause, I will answer your question. We also have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation too. So again, at any point you have questions, need any clarification, or have your own comments you want to add in, unmute yourself and chime on in. So pretty laid back here today. So we're going to start looking at 3 ways abusive relationships end. The first one is the abuser gets help for their problem. I have often gotten the question from my clients in counseling, can they change? Can they change? And I've been thinking about that question over the last few years, and I've come to the realization that the question isn't can they change? The question is, do they want to change? And that really changes the dynamics of our thought process and how we've come to understand abusers. So if the abuser is willing and wanting to get help, that would be an option for the abusive relationship. And I just want to make a few quick comments on that. If there is drug and alcohol abuse and use intermixed with domestic violence, because we see them go hand in hand a lot, I just want to emphasize there are actually 2 different issues that you're working with. So if you so if the abuser says, okay, well, I'll go to something like AA or do something to address the alcohol and drug abuse, that's great, but it's not going to stop the abuse. They are actually 2 separate issues. So the abuser would need to go to something that works specifically on exploring why they're behaving the way that they are. There are PAPE classes, which I would highly recommend for abuser. That's partner abuse intervention programs. So something that the abuser is going to that works specifically on their behavior. I also just want to make a quick note that a lot of people want to initially go to like couples counseling or marriage counseling. Initially, that's not a great idea. What we've seen is when couples do that, that it can further victimize the partner due to the open communication in those counseling sessions can result in more violence after the sessions end. And so we're hesitant to encourage people to do any sort of couples or marriage counseling from the get-go, at least until there's more work done on the abusive behavior specifically. The second way an abusive relationship can end is if the victim leaves the relationship. And we're going to talk a little bit more about leaving here in just a minute. So I'm not going to say a whole lot right now on that one. And then the third is the relationship continues. Unfortunately, statistically speaking, abuse continues to escalate over time. So the longer the relationship continues, the more detrimental and dangerous it becomes to both the victim and the abuser. Either one of the abuser or the victim can become depressed over the situation or even suicidal. There can become a chemical dependence on drugs and alcohol for both the victim or the abuser. And that there can be a development of a mental or emotional disorder. If the violence escalates enough, unfortunately, sometimes the relationships ends in death. So either the abuser killing their victim or the victim killing their abuser in self-defense. So those are kind of the three ways an abusive relationship ends. So I said we were going to talk a little bit more about what happens when a victim leaves the relationship. There are a lot of barriers. I'm actually going to, if you guys are willing to unmute yourselves for just a second, if you have anything to add into this, I'd just like to hear from you guys if you can think of barriers that a victim might face when trying to leave their abuser. So what might be reasons that a victim would stay with their abuser? So if anybody has any idea, I'd love input, please unmute yourself. I'd love to hear.
I stayed because it was my kid's dad.
Kid's dad, yeah. Absolutely.
I think because they think that they're in love and that like love, they think it maybe is abuse, and then that's just all they think it is.
Financial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fear.
These are all great. Anybody else have any other thoughts? You guys hit a lot of the key ones on the head. We hear a lot of my clients hear the question so often, why don't you just leave? And it's not that easy. Unfortunately, the reality is that victims face a lot of barriers. You guys talked about financial, right? So if it's a one income house, or maybe they are only working part-time, it might be hard for them to leave and survive on a one income. Maybe they don't have anywhere to go. This is their house, right? It's a shared home. Where would they go? They'd have to uproot their kids, their shared kids, as somebody had mentioned. The thought that it's better to have a two-parent household than a one-parent household. There's fear. Somebody also mentioned, what will happen if I leave? There's some shame or embarrassment that comes with it, though it's not their fault. There oftentimes are feelings of shame and guilt. Maybe it's a lack of support or resources. So not knowing where to go, not even knowing about something like Freedom House, or not feeling like they have trusted friends and family to talk to. What we see a lot of times is abusers are really good at what they do, so they can put on a face out in public. And so it makes it hard for a victim to disclose abuse because, well, you see this person as a very charismatic and charming person, but they're actually very different behind closed doors. And so that makes it complex for a victim to come forth. Maybe there's a lack of safety plan, which we're going to talk about safety here in just a bit. Love, somebody mentioned love. Things weren't always messy, especially at the beginning when the relationship started. victims love their abuser. And so that keeps them anchored sometimes, and hope. Somebody said hope too. I think Amber talked about this when she did the cycle of violence, and how you have the tensions escalating, and then there's explosive behavior, and then the honeymoon where there's the I'm sorry's, I'll get help, I won't ever do this again. That leaves the victim feeling hopeful, like, oh, maybe they will change, maybe this was their wake up call. And that can become a really dangerous thing for a victim. There could be fear of DCFS involvement, kids being taken away. There's so many different barriers that victims face. I do want to say this, there is a short 20-minute TED Talk that we listen to in our domestic violence education program. It's called Why Domestic Violence Victims Don't Leave, with Leslie Steiner. I encourage you to check it out if this is something you're at all interested in. It really helps you to just understand more about the barriers and why it is not easy for victims to leave their abuser. So looking at the stages of a victim leaving their abuser. So stages 1 and 2, this is a 5-stage study that came out of the University of Illinois. So I just want to pause and say that for a second. I also want to pause and say that it's not a clear-cut process. The average victim leaves their abuser 7 times. So that means some victims are leaving their abuser maybe once or twice, and some are leaving 20, 30, 50, 100 times. Okay, so the average here is 7 times before a victim actually leaves their abuser for good. So with that said, I just want to say that leaving is a process. It is not an event. So let's look at the 5 stages here. Stages 1 and 2 are kind of combined. You see the victim is starting to not care for their abuser and is emotionally disconnecting from the relationship. So they're starting to see the behaviors of their abuser. It's not flattering for them. They're just starting to question, why are they treating me this way? And they're starting to emotionally disconnect from that relationship. And then in stage 3, they're noticing the effects of the abuse, preparing to leave, and leaving itself. So in stage 3, they're seeing how maybe their mental health, their physical health, everything is starting to be affected by it. Maybe their work, how their kids are being impacted by the abuse. They're preparing to leave, and then they leave. Stage 4, you have the victim returning back to the abuser, and a lot of back and forth. So when we say the average of 7 times, this is kind of the stage where we see that average come into play. And then the final stage is the victim actually leaving and being gone for at least 6 months or more. So again, leaving an abusive relationship is a process, not an event, and it looks different for everybody. Again, some may leave once or twice and be done for good, and some never leave in the end. And so stage 5 is never experienced by a victim. Some will stay till the end of time. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit here. Part of leaving an abusive relationship, you have to talk about safety. Safety has to come first. This is an important piece of what we do at Freedom House. We recognize that 70% of all domestic violence victims are murdered after they've left their abuser. So 70% of murders of a victim happen after they've left their abuser. So safety is so important, not just when preparing to leave, but also after a victim has left. Why do I say safety first? I say safety first because a victim cannot begin to process the trauma or begin to heal until they are in a safe space. Safety is so important. That's physical, mental, and emotional safety. I think I had emailed Brittany some handouts on safety planning. There was one where you could actually work through a safety plan, and then one just had some different tips, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But let's just pause for a second and look at what is a safety plan. This may not be a familiar concept to you, but a safety plan is essentially a set of actions that help reduce the risk of further harm. So it includes specific information to you and your current circumstances. And it increases safety, whether you're at work, at home, school, the grocery store, out the park, wherever you are. So everybody's safety plan is going to look a little bit different. It's going to be specific to where they're traveling in their life, where, if the abuser is in the home versus out of the home, if you're still in the relationship, or if you've left the relationship. And another important thing to note about safety planning is that it is dynamic, not static. So what that means, it's constantly changing. Again, if you create a safety plan when you're preparing to leave, your safety plan is going to look different once you've actually left the relationship. So I'm going to ask you guys again, if to just put on your thinking caps here for a minute. What might be considered some important elements of a safety plan? What might be some things that victims need to be taking into consideration when piecing together a safety plan? So if you have any thoughts on that, go ahead.
Support system.
Support system, absolutely. Any other thoughts?
I was thinking maybe like not telling them where you're going, and like maybe turning off like the tracking thing on your phone so they can't track you to find out where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Having your phone, going to the your phone company and making sure that there's no bug on your phone, turning off your locations, not putting your location on social media. Absolutely, that's a good one. Any other thoughts on what might be some important elements of a safety plan? So I'm gonna just read off some things that this is on one of the documents that you should have. It's on safety planning, things to just be thinking about. Again, with safety planning, whether it's something that you need to know personally or somebody who is in an abusive relationship, these are all tools and things that you can be thinking about and passing along to your friend or family member. Just some simple like tips, thinking about if you can if you're in the house and an argument happens, thinking about the space around you, if you can somehow shift the conversation from the kitchen to the living room. In the kitchen, there's a lot of knives and different weapons that can be used against you. So trying to move conversation to a room that may not have as many objects to be used against you. Letting trusted friends and family and neighbors know what's going on. So if it's a neighbor you trust, saying, hey, if you hear anything going on, please call 911 right away. Using a code word or a signal that your family and friends know that if you call up or you text or you yell out this code word, that it's go time. Whenever I think about this, I think about many years ago, my family was on vacation in Washington, D.C. This was, I don't even know, I was in elementary school, so a long time ago. And my mom was just a nervous wreck the whole time. And my dad was like off in La La Land. And my mom started panicking. She's like, if I yell the word donuts, that means I'm in trouble and go into action. So our family code word, jokingly so over the years, has been donuts. Thank God we've not had to use it, but just thinking of a code word that no one would think like, hey, mom, I call mom up like, mom, I need some donuts, right? It would be something that would signal her into action. Maybe something you could do when preparing to leave is pack bags ahead of time. Just some essential things. Maybe you can, if you have medication that you're taking that's essential to your health, that you pack away some of those pills, put it at a trusted friend or family's house, or put it in the trunk of your car if your abuser's not ever going to be in the trunk of your car. Plan on where you're going to go if and when you leave. Rehearse your safety plan, talk about it with your kids. That's super important. Let kids know if there's a fight that breaks out at the house, maybe it's safe for them to run to the neighbor's house, and so they're not exposed to what's going on. If there's an order of protection in place, making sure that you carry that order of protection with you wherever you go. That important people like caregivers, the principal, whoever needs to know that they're aware that there is an order of protection, and let them know who can and cannot pick up your kids from school. If you're working, maybe it looks like taking a different route. If this is somebody who stalks you, you're taking a different route periodically. Or you need somebody to escort you to and from your car as you are leaving work. There's a lot on internet and computer safety. Somebody already brought up a really important part of making sure that you do not have any sort of tracking device on your computer, just being careful about what you post online on social media. There's a lot of ways, things that we don't necessarily think of, but there's a lot of resources on the internet too when you're looking at safety planning. With that said, being careful of what computer you're looking stuff up on. If it's a shared computer or device of some sort with the abuser, that might not be the best place to search domestic violence shelters or safety planning. So finding a computer maybe at the library or somewhere would be helpful. And then on the end of that checklist is a list of things that you should take with you when you're leaving. It's anything from legal paperwork to driver's license to medications, medical records, visas, passports, all that stuff. I just want to say, if you have time to prepare, those are great things to think about. But if your safety is in jeopardy, leave the house without it. There's a way to figure all of that out later. Okay, safety has to be first. So there's those handouts for you. Again, there is a safety plan in there that you can kind of look over, and that has a lot more specific things on it. Somebody had mentioned earlier the importance of support. Support is so important. This is true of all factors of life, right? Like, we can't do life on our own. I think about, like, parenting is so dang hard. I think about the quote, it takes a village to raise a child. We have to have support. Life is not easy. This last year has been super tough with the pandemic and just so many different adjustments having to be made. Domestic violence is no different. You have to have support. And so spending time to sort through the people who are in your life, who are the people that support you, how do they support you, what kind of support do you need? This is so important and vital for victims as they are, whether they choose to leave the relationship or they stay in the relationship, to find people who will walk with them is monumental for them. So just want you guys to, again, we're going to pause here for a second, and I want you to think about the people in your life that are support people. Maybe it's a good friend, it's a family member, it's a coworker. I just want you to think of particular people. I'm not going to ask you to share names by any means, but I want you to think of names and faces. Who are your support people? And then I want you to think about what makes them a good source of support. And that I will ask if you're willing to share. What makes somebody a good source of support?
Non-judgmental.
Yeah, absolutely.
Loyalty.
Loyalty. Yeah.
Been in the same situation you have been in?
Yeah, someone who's walked in your shoes. They tend to have more understanding and to be less judgmental. Yeah. That's great. Any other thoughts on what makes somebody a good support system? Something I do with my clients often is have them, you can see that image on the screen right here, where you have yourself in the center, and then they identify different relationships they have in their life. Anything from teachers, classmates, family, friends, coworkers, your doctor, whoever it is in your life, and to have them step back and look at these relationships and see, are these healthy relationships or are they toxic relationships? Who are the people that I can trust to walk with me, and who are the people that I need to give myself distance to? I think that's something that's really beneficial for us all to kind of pause and do periodically in our life. what relationships are life-giving and which relationships are life-sucking. I'm sure we can all sit here and think real quick about both kinds of relationships of people we have in our life, right? People who are toxic and people who truly are life-giving and encouraging and supportive. That one of our roles at Freedom House, our biggest role, I should say, is to just walk alongside our clients, to be a source of support for them. Our biggest priority at Freedom House is safety. I'm going to keep emphasizing the importance of safety. We help clients seek safety through numerous avenues. We have our hotline, which is available 24/7. We also have our local phone number as well. We have people that will call in from all over our 5 counties and beyond, just needing to work through some safety planning, to know what their options are. Maybe they're calling in because they need shelter. So we have our shelter that also is 365 days a year. We do legal advocacy. So if somebody's in need of an order of protection to help further their safety planning, we walk with them through that process. We talked about economic barriers earlier. So we do a lot of economic advocacy with clients, helping them secure long-term housing, whether they're in shelter or a non-residential client. We also help them with maybe resume building and job applications and things like that, just to help clients overcome those economic barriers that keep them tethered to their abusive partner. Some other things that we do parenting education. So we work with victims who are trying to parent under a great amount of stress. Again, parenting is tough no matter what. And then you add the weight of an abusive relationship on top of that, and it just makes it that much harder. And so we talk about a lot of the stuff that Mary talked about the other day, but also just supporting clients as they figure out parenting in the midst of all the transition and chaos. We do domestic violence education, both that and the parenting are 10-week courses. We do one-on-one with clients, and then we have prevention educators who go out into the schools and work with kids from preschool through high school, teaching them about safety. We have about 10 minutes left on this. Okay, sorry, got a notification. We'll probably switch to the new link here in just a minute. They go out and they talk about body safety, they talk about healthy relationships. They do all sorts of things to start training kids early on, what's okay, what's not okay, what's healthy and what is. And then counseling, which is what I do. So looking a little bit more at counseling, one of the first things I do with clients is safety planning. Again, safety is so important. You cannot process what you've been through until you have got yourself in a safe space. We also do service planning, which is working on goals with clients. So all of my clients have a service plan where there are specific goals that they're working on in their counseling time with me. We do processing of trauma. We do a lot on creating healthy boundaries. Boundaries is one of the things that we're not really taught by our parents. And so we see generation after generation of people growing up not knowing healthy boundaries. So there's a lot of work on healthy boundaries. Again, the formal and informal domestic violence education, building of healthy coping skills, addressing flashbacks and triggers, and self-care. So we're actually going to end our last half of this presentation talking about flashbacks and triggers and self-care. These are common things that come up in session and something that I was asked to talk about today. Before we transition to the next link, I just want to say real quick that our counseling is domestic violence centered. We are not mental health providers. I do have a lot of clients that see mental health providers in addition to working with myself. I do a lot of referrals too. So if they're not already seeing somebody but want to, I highly encourage clients to have their feet in both doors, both in mental health and in our counseling. So we focus primarily on the domestic violence. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit here about triggers. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with triggers, but we're gonna walk through just some basic information for you to understand what a trigger is. And I do not have my video. Okay, well, golly. Hold on, I am so sorry. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, so triggers essentially are another word for a paired association. They are common amongst people who've experienced trauma, whether like a soldier or a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, or somebody who's lived through a natural disaster or a terrorist attack, or maybe childhood abuse. So triggers are super common, but they're also experienced by people who have not ever experienced trauma as well. So we're going to differentiate a trauma-induced trigger and just a regular emotional trigger as well. So a trigger is a neutral stimulus, such as an object or event, that gets linked with a physiological reaction, such as a fear response. So that fear response might feel like anxiety, a stomach ache, a panic attack, rapid heartbeat, short-term memory loss. Your senses go into high alert, and your body, without your control, goes into fight, flight, or freeze or fawn mode. Now, fawn might be a new one for you. Fawn is essentially where somebody plays along with whatever is going on. So if we're talking about a situation with a victim and their abuser, the victim may play along with whatever their abuser is asking of them just to avoid further abuse. So we have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. When we are triggered, our brain pauses to deal with the threat. So you see the short-term memory loss. We do not have control over how our body responds, unfortunately. Our body does what our body's going to do, and there's not much we can do about it to control it. The good thing about triggers are they're our body's way of keeping us safe. So years ago, here's all my little family stories here. I'm letting all of our family secrets out. We were hiking at Starved Rock many years ago, and we were hiking along the trail, and all of a sudden my mom just stopped with her foot like in the air, getting ready to step down. And right below my mom's foot was a snake. My mom froze, literally like stopped. My dad saw what was happening. He picked up a rock and started throwing it at the snake, and my sisters and I scattered, right? So mom freezes, dad goes into fight mode. He's gonna protect all of us, and us girls, we get the heck out of Dodge, right? We flee. All of our bodies were triggered. We all responded differently. Luckily, my dad went into fight mode and got the snake out of our way. But I remember at that time, like my heart was racing. I'm scared. I don't like snakes. I don't even like worms. That's my confession. They freak me out. So, you know, a snake really just does me in. So it's something that triggers my body, right? The rapid heartbeat. I like panicked, didn't know what to do. So I fled the scene. Fast forward to about a year and a half ago at Freedom House, we did the active shooter training with Officer Jensen. And we were doing role play. And so he had us all sitting around in the large conference room at Freedom House, and we knew he was coming in, right? We knew it was happening. He had a Nerf gun. He gave us a few little like softballs that we could throw at him as our defense. Ideally, we'd be throwing, you know, like staplers and whatnot if it was a real active shooter coming through. And sure enough, he breaks into the conference room. What do? I hide behind the podium. I freak out. I just hide. I'm like underneath the podium, like in a ball, like a little baby. There are people that fled out of the conference room. Some people went underneath the tables, and other people started throwing the balls that he provided. We, again, don't have control. Clearly, I seem to be a flight kind of person. Some people just froze. Other people fled the scene. I don't know that any of us played along with what he was doing, so there was no fawning that day. But again, our body's triggered, and our body does the best that it can to keep us safe when we are triggered by some sort of stimulus. Let's see, this will advance here. So given what you know about domestic violence, can you think of possible triggers a victim may encounter? What might be something that would trigger a victim of abuse?
A sound or a smell?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else have any ideas?
Certain word phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. Words or phrases. What was that one? Oh, I thought I heard something else. So it can be a person, it could be the way a person looks, right? It could be a beard, it could be a particular place like a restaurant or a store. It can be a smell, like you said. It can be a sound, even somebody, a tone of voice, right? It doesn't even necessarily have to be the words, but it could be a specific phrase. It could be a taste. It can be something in social media or on the news. It can be colors. It could be anniversaries. It could be different situations. There's all sorts of things. I had a client that was triggered by the smell of smoke before. Her abuser was a smoker, and whenever she'd smell smoke, she would get triggered. Her body would go into defense mode. Unfortunately, we cannot control our triggers any more than we can control how we respond to them. We might want to fight when our triggers happen, but our body will say flee, right? Like, I'd like to think that if an active shooter was coming at me, I would fight. I just hid, okay? I like froze, did nothing. We cannot control how our body responds. Triggers, all in all, are not bad. They're actually inherently very neutral. The problem is when we have a dangerous reaction to something when we're actually safe. So the brain has become trained at the sight or smell of a trigger, and our body responds in fear. So the goal is to differentiate between a perceived danger versus a real danger. So again, the goal is to figure out, is this something that is actually dangerous, or is my mind just thinking that it's dangerous? So there's a difference when talking about common everyday emotional triggers and trauma-induced triggers. The snake for me was just a common everyday trigger, right? Most people would probably freak out if they saw a snake. But we had a boy who was doing counseling with one of our children counselors a few years ago, and his trigger was a tree. So this little boy, his dad would have him sit in the living room and watch as his mom sat in a chair in front of a window, and the dad would beat the mom. And the boy would look out the window past his mom to avoid having dead eye contact with what was going on. And outside that tree, or outside that window, was a tree. So the tree became a sign for this boy, right? It became a trigger for him. There's a tree. His body started to trigger and go into the fight, flight, fight, or flee mode. It was a particular kind of tree. For the sake of, we'll say it was a maple tree. So when that boy would see maple trees, his body would respond to that stimulus, right? And he had no control over it. So a trigger like that, a trauma-induced trigger, is going to be different than me seeing a snake. Is the boy really in danger every time he sees a maple tree? No, he's not. But his mind is wired to associate the tree with the trauma, tree and abuse. That's how his mind associated the two. I am often asked by clients, a lot of my clients, if not probably 100% of them, deal with triggers to some degree or another. How do I overcome my trigger? This is what I know. The more we avoid the trigger, the more anxious we become. The more the boy tried to avoid the maple tree, the more anxious the boy becomes when encountering the tree. So avoidance breeds further anxiety. So how do we begin to face or unpair our triggers? This came from Emma McAdam. She's a licensed therapist. Therapy in a nutshell, if you ever want to look up her materials. She will tell you the good news is that we can train our brains to unpair the stimulus in a safe space. So again, what's the key word? The key word is safe space. So we are exposed to the trigger and nothing bad happens. And if that happens enough, we can unpair the object and the physiological response. So she gives us 7 simple steps to unpair. First, you have to notice and name the trigger. So we're going to look at the example of the maple tree. Is it dangerous or perceived danger? That tree is not going to do anything to the boy, right? So it's actually a perceived danger. So then the second step would be to write down a physical or emotional reactions to the trigger. My heart's racing. I feel like I go into panic mode. I can't think straight, right? So you have your short-term memory. So write down whatever physical or emotional reaction to the trigger. And then write down the maple tree feels dangerous, but it's actually safe. It feels dangerous, but it's actually safe. And then the fourth step would be to choose a trigger. So we're going to do the maple tree again, that you'd like to actively face and break it down into small steps. So how are we going to face the trigger? Maybe for the boy, he would just go up and he'd touch the maple tree. Okay, I'm safe. Nothing happened. The next time he'd approach the tree, maybe he'd sit by it for 30 seconds and build up time, right? And something that I would encourage somebody who's facing their trigger, if you can, have somebody who you trust, who you feel safe and confident in, to be with you as you are facing the trigger. Sit with it until your body begins to feel calmer. Build up time with whatever that trigger is. And then the sixth thing is remind yourself that anxiety feels uncomfortable, but it's not actually dangerous. My heart might be racing. I may feel anxious right now, but I'm actually safe. And then breathe. Practice self-regulation. Deep breathing, muscle relaxation, relax your shoulders, relax your arms, your back, your legs, and practice safe thinking. I'm safe. Nothing's happening. The tree may feel dangerous, but it's actually safe. And you continue to do this, and it takes time and it takes patience, but our brains are phenomenal and they can rewire and unpair these triggers that are trauma induced. Other things that you can do when triggered. So if you are in the heat of the moment and you're triggered, it's not the time to sit there and unpair the trigger with the response, right? It's not time to sit there and take deep breaths and say it feels dangerous, but it's not. So these are things like in the heat of the moment, if you're sensing that your body is triggered, you can begin to move your body, right? Get moving, walking, stretching. You could do yoga, whatever you need. If you have some yoga poses that are your go-to, just get your body moving to shift the response from your head to your body. Use grounding techniques. I think Mary talked about some of these with kids the other day. I'm going to highlight just one in just a second. Get some fresh air. So if you're inside and you're being triggered, try to get outside, open a window, do whatever you need to do to get fresh air. Practice cozy self-care, draw a warm bath, put on your comfiest pajamas. Let your emotions be, right? Allow yourself to just process the emotion. It may feel uncomfortable, right? The anxiety may feel uncomfortable, but anxiety itself is not dangerous. Maybe it's tapping on your body, tapping your shoulders, tapping your legs, tapping your back, tapping your knee, whatever it is, just doing something calming to bring your heart rate back down. And then get support. If there's somebody that you can just call up, say, hey, I just was triggered, I'm struggling. Somebody, again, that you trust, that you know will sit with you in a non-judgmental way and just let you work through your emotions. Another thing that we do with our clients a lot is we walk them through your senses. So engaging your senses is a great way to shift the trauma from the head to the body. So I always tell people, if you can't remember the order, it does not matter. Just get yourself engaged in the world around you. So what are 5 things I can see? I can see the lantern. I can see the window. I can see the curtains. I can see the table. I can see the shelf over there. What can I feel? I can feel the table. I can feel the chair that I'm sitting on. I can feel my jeans. I can, whatever. And then 3 things. What do I hear? I can hear cars going by. I can hear the wind outside. What are 2 things I can smell? I can smell the candle that's burning. I can smell the fire outside, whatever it is. What's something I can taste? I can taste the water that I'm drinking right now. So engaging your senses when you are, again, this is when you are in the height of a trigger. You're not going to look to unpair that trigger when you are experiencing the trigger itself. Okay, so when you are feeling triggered, your body is not feeling safe. Unpairing a trigger, only happens when you are feeling safe. This last one we're going to look at here is breath. It's the acronym breath. I'm going to go through it real quick. This is something I honestly think is really great for parents too. I'm hoping I'm not the only parent who has ever like freaked out in a moment of like, I'm under stress and my kids are driving me crazy and I feel like I'm going to like fly off the handle here, right? Please tell me I'm not alone. These are some things that we can kind of adapt when we're parenting too. So these again are more for emotional triggers than they are trauma-induced triggers. So breathe, take a deep breath when you're fuming, right? Reflect, why am I so upset right now? What just happened? Empathy, empathize with yourself. It's okay that I'm feeling angry right now. And then approach, how do I want to take action? Do I need to step back from this moment and just take a few minutes time out? Do I need to have a conversation right now? What do I need to do? If you need to have a conversation, then tell that person. Speak up to them in a way that's not confrontational. Tell them what you're feeling, what's going on. I'm feeling really angry right now. I'm feeling really upset. Maybe someone said something to you as a trigger for you, so you tell them. And then the last thing is to ask them for help. What do you need from them? Do you need them to be more mindful, to listen, to be more sensitive? Do you need them to just sit and talk with you about it? We have to communicate what we need. We cannot expect other people to just know. So again, there's some elements of this I think are really good just for parenting. Sometimes I have to just walk away for a few minutes and take a few breaths. It's best for my children and for me. So we're just going to wrap up here. I'm just going to spend literally a few minutes. I know we're almost out of time, but self-care is so important. I spend like every session talking to my clients, even if it's just for a few minutes. What are you doing to take care of yourself? Self-care defined here is how you take your power back. So self-care is doing anything that is self-empowering to you. Self-care for you is going to look different than it does for me. There's certain things that are really life-giving to me that you're like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't waste my time doing that, right? So we all have to figure out what works for us. Self-care is defined as a practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health. So thinking of that definition, if you guys just have like want to throw out a thing or two that you like to do for self-care or ideally would like to do for self-care, if you have some examples, I'd love to hear. Anybody good at doing self-care?
When I can afford it, I like to go get a massage.
Awesome. Yeah.
I like to go for walks and listen to my audiobook.
Perfect. Yeah. Anybody else do anything? This is something that I am always challenging myself. I am not good at walking my talk, but I'll be darned if I'm not going to be after you to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Something that I'm really working on personally. We have got to take care of ourselves, whether you have been through trauma, you're going through trauma, or you're just trying to survive a pandemic and parenting or whatever it is. You have got to take care of yourself. You cannot take care of other people if you're not taking care of yourself. So again, self-care is just anything that is self-empowering to you. I have learned that I love crafting. Who knew? I didn't know. But I do, and I love being outside, fresh air, bike rides, things like that are super empowering for me, and just really life-giving. I've noticed that a lot of my clients have had somebody dictating their interest in what they do with their time for so long that when we talk about self-care, they look at me like a deer in the headlights. They have no clue what I'm talking about. They don't know what they're interested in. They don't know what their hobbies are. So we spend time kind of just relearning what makes them tick, because that has not even been a thought on their mind for so long. I think this is the last thing I have for you guys here, and I gave this handout as well. This is just looking at different ways to take care of your physical health. You're looking at exercise, healthy eating, regular medical care, adequate sleep, going on vacations, getting out in nature. Nature and fresh air are so important. I cannot emphasize that enough. You're looking at your psychological well-being, journaling, self-reflection, maybe art therapy, reading a self-help book can be very empowering. Just relaxing, being a part of a support group. For emotional self-love, social justice engagement, finding a hobby, watching a funny movie, just laughing. Spiritual, you can do meditation, singing, dancing, yoga, volunteer for a cause that you feel passionate about. For personal, plan short and long-term goals, foster relationships with those around you, learn who you are. Sometimes we lose sight of who we are. So spending intentional time kind of getting to know ourselves again. And then professional, I love some of the professional stuff here. Set boundaries, make sure you're using your vacation days, learn to say no, take mental health days if possible. Do not work during time off and leave work at work. Those are great things to be thinking about. So again, self-care is super important. And like I said, it's one of the things I do with my clients on a regular basis, check in to see, hey, how are you taking care of yourself? So I talked way too much. I am so sorry. I get excited about what I do, and I get excited to talk with other people about what we do at Freedom House too. So if anybody has any questions, I'm going to zip my lips for a minute here.
I just had a quick question. You had referred to a TED Talk, and I think you said the title was Why Victims Don't Leave Their Abusers. Is that correct?
Yep, by Leslie Steiner.
Okay.
And she wrote a book, Crazy Love. She was a victim herself and walks you through her personal journey.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did have a question for either children or adults. If someone comes to you and tells you that they are abused, what is the very first step of help, trying to get them help?
Yeah, so it depends on what they're looking for. I did mean to mention this earlier. If somebody calls our hotline, that does not mean that they are committing to our services. So I did want to clarify that. If somebody comes, if it is a child, we are mandated reporters, so reporting has to happen. But we do safety planning on the spot right there. When people call the hotline, we are constantly safety planning with them. Again, with children, we are mandated reporters, so we go into action with DCFS, reporting that, making sure that the child's in a safe space. For some people, that looks like coming into shelter right away. We get calls and people are at our shelter within the hour sometimes. And then we also talk to them about the legal advocacy piece. If an order of protection is necessary, we help them move forward on that. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and it just depends on the scenario. Is that helpful at all? Do you have?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Don't ever hesitate to reach out to us at Freedom House if you have any questions. Brittany has my email. You can always email me if something else comes up later. Thank you for listening to me talk for an hour. Oh my goodness, so sorry about that. I hope there was something that was helpful for you or somebody that you know. Again, don't ever hesitate. My email's up there right now. Just jportillo@freedomhouseillinois.com. So if you ever need anything, just reach out. So, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And take care of yourselves. That's the last thing I'll say. All right.